Commence target practice. As a special treat, you can practice freely on any of the targets in the shooting range today. Shoot away. When you're done, head over to the exit.
Remember why we created MSF Snake. To provide military force to whoever needs it, wherever they are, regardless of nation or ideology. Our beliefs aren't all that lofty.
We just won't be the tools of any one country.
Exactly. We know only how to fight. But we refuse to live our lives at the whim of the state. The MSF SEAL is patterned after Pangaea, the supercontinent from 250 million years ago. Back then, the whole world was one landmass. One world. No gaps, no rifts.
Our strength will take us back there. What about you, Kaz? Any interest in expanding MSF?
You'd better believe it. I want to make us into an organization that doesn't take orders from any country. Just like you were saying, we have to be strong. Strong enough to defend ourselves. We need money, too. Money to train soldiers to fight. The way I see it, we make MSF into something along the lines of a new kind of business. A contractor providing the full range of military services, not just combat, but logistics, training, weapons, outfitting, and R&D. Combining the small footprint and exceptional performance of special forces with the raw military might of a full regular army. Only with that kind of power can we break free of nation states. What I need from you, boss, is to go out and find guys we can bring back here using Fulton Recovery. Then tell us what assignment to use them for. I'll take care of the rest. Your old mentor, the boss. She was known in the West as the mother of special forces, right?
Nothing but propaganda.
Actually, it's not all that far from the truth. I heard the KGB just set up a counter-sabotage cell. Alpha Group, I think they call it. There's even a rumor that West Germany created a counter-terrorist unit within its border police after the debacle at the Munich Olympics. Back home in the States, they've got the illustrious Green Berets, the SEALs, and your personal creation, Foxhound. The seeds sown by the boss are beginning to sprout. Same goes for MSF, right? In creating it, you were carrying on the will of the boss.
Yeah. She taught me how to fight the hard way. She beat it into me.
And now, thanks to her, we can take on missions other than just conventional combat. After all, we've got the same mother as the Army's Special Forces. Costa Rica isn't alone. All of Latin America is getting swept up in the superpowers' Cold War. The whole ideological split between East and West. In the end, it's just a greedy scramble for wealth by the ruling classes. The Western bourgeois stand to lose everything if their countries go communist. After all, the communists want to abolish private property altogether. So the capitalist rulers desperately tried to halt the global spread of communism. Hence the phenomenon of red baiting. And the communists, for their part, didn't exactly stay true to their principles. They tried to escape class-based society. But between Stalin's autocracy and the rise of the nomenklatura, they ended up creating one anyway. Once people have power, they stop caring about equality. That's where communism, where society in general reaches its limits. The rulers only care about their own gain. The opposing side becomes a risk factor that threatens the profit, and thus the ongoing struggle between capitalism and communism was born.
And now, nuclear deterrence is part of the picture.
Exactly. They say nuclear weapons are the reason we haven't seen conflict on a global scale since World War II. The thought that your opponent might launch nukes against you sort of makes it tough to start an armed conflict, especially now that they've got intercontinental ballistic missiles. Nowhere is safe.
Of course, all that has caused military expenditures to skyrocket.
Well, the only way to ward off a preemptive strike is to flaunt your own nuclear stockpile. And that's caused their numbers to increase exponentially, not just with regards to destructive power, but in terms of targeting technology, too. Now they can hit a target halfway across the world with pinpoint accuracy. In a way, the space race was a demonstration of that technological progress.
And as a result of all that, we now have mutually assured destruction.
It's the ultimate form of deterrence. No one's going to launch their nukes knowing they'll be obliterated in return.
I don't know. The chance of somebody hitting the button by mistake is never zero.
You're right. Even with peace guaranteed by MAD, there's always the risk of an accident.
Nobody wants the world to end on account of some machines malfunctioning.
On the other hand, thanks to deterrence, we haven't had a world war since 1945. You gotta admit, it has been pretty peaceful.
Not that it matters to us.
People point at the nuclear arms and space races and call it a Cold War. I say if they're not shooting at each other, why not call it world peace?
Doesn't mean war is gone. Look at Korea. Look at Vietnam.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking in relative terms here. Besides, if war died out completely, we'd be SOL.
We're not warmongers.
And yet, we can't survive in a world that's at peace.
You got a point.
So it's been more than 10 years since the Cuban Missile Crisis, huh?
I don't think we'll ever forget it.
No kidding. Those 13 days starting October 15th, 1962, were probably the closest we ever came to all-out nuclear war. The Russians deployed nuclear missiles to Cuba. America responded with a naval blockade. Then Russia shot down an American spy plane. I was still a teenager back then, but I remember what it felt like to be one step away from nuclear war. The adults were freaking out.
If it wasn't for the Cuban Missile Crisis, there might never have been an Operation Snake Eater. And
What's the matter, Snake? It's not like you to get all hypothetical.
I guess not. It was the reassessment after the missile crisis that paved the way for the hotline between Moscow and Washington, and also for détente. That's irony for you.
The Treaty of Tlatelolco was enacted to make Latin America into a nuclear-free zone. It bans the testing, use, manufacture, production, acquisition, storage, and deployment of nuclear weapons. The impetus was pretty obvious. The series of crises triggered by the deployment of nukes in Cuba.
Not hard to imagine. Those 13 days had the whole world frozen in fear.
Of course, the country that started it all, Cuba, hasn't actually ratified it yet.
Still, the treaty's backed by over 20 countries. Anyone flouting it risks becoming an international pariah.
True. Opinol would investigate, no doubt. I heard they used Japan's 3 non-nuclear principles as their model when they drew up the treaty. I think the Treaty of Tlatelolco might have been their way of asking nuclear powers not to use nukes against them. That's the biggest difference between the treaty and the 3 principles. I guess you could call it a 4th principle.
So Costa Rica abolished its army back in, 1949? Pretty gutsy move for a Central American nation at the time.
Yeah, well, they'd just come out of a civil war. I'm sure they were driven by a desire to avoid another tragedy like Paz said. But I think they had a more compelling reason. Army coup d'etat are a way of life in so many Latin American countries. Imagine seeing that up close.
No army, no coup. Makes sense.
Plus, their economy was in ruins, so they honestly didn't have any money to spend on an army anyway.
Yeah, but weren't they on less than friendly terms with Nicaragua?
Yeah, and in fact, Nicaragua did end up invading. But the Civil Guard fought back and the OAS brokered a ceasefire. The US and the rest of the OAS had their back, and they used it to full advantage. For a quarter century, they survived in the powder keg of Central America. That must have taken some serious diplomacy, even if the Civil Guard is pretty decked out for a police force.
Must be tough to be a country without an army.
Hey, Snake, mind if I ask you something?
Since when did you start asking permission?
So, you used to be part of a CIA paramilitary unit, right?
That's right.
Ever do any ops in Central America?
No, not personally. But there were other units who did all kinds of stuff.
I remember the Bay of Pigs invasion back in '61. The papers had a field day with it.
Operation Zapata. That was the CIA code name. The whole thing went south.
Then there was Che Guevara, being hunted down in Bolivia. I heard the CIA had a hand in that, too.
There were several units similar to mine. MSP, SOG. They'd recruit former special forces, train them as intelligence agents, and send them on deniable covert paramilitary operations. One of those units trained the Bolivian army in counter-guerrilla tactics.
And then had them shoot El Che.
So the story goes.
Around here they say La CIA instead of CIA, huh?
Nothing strange about it. That's how it's pronounced when you read it in Spanish.
It has the feminine noun ending a, so they use the article la. Apparently some people have taken to using the term UCLA.
That's a new one to me. What's it mean?
It stands for Unilaterally Controlled Latino Assets.
Meaning they're local agents?
Yeah, that's the idea. Washington uses them like pawns. Nobody knows who they really are or what they're doing.
You were saying Japan has a peace constitution too.
Yep. Japan renounced war in Article 9 of its constitution, aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order. The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation, and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes. In order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized.
You know it by heart.
Some things you never forget.
Impressive. There were some parts I didn't quite get, though. Like the whole means of settling conflicts thing.
Yeah, that's been the subject of debate. Whether or not it forbids any and all use of force. The current Constitution was originally drawn up under the Allied occupation. The first draft was even submitted by Allied GHQ. So naturally, there are some who feel the Constitution was imposed on Japan by foreigners.
Things like that are never simple. Same for every country, I guess.
One thing's for sure, though. Not having an army let Japan focus on economic recovery after the war. In that sense, it's the same as Costa Rica.
Kaz, you were in the Japanese Self-Defense Force, right? I thought that Article 9 you were talking about earlier prevented Japan from having an army.
Yeah, and that's another subject of controversy. The Self-Defense Force is an organization for the purpose of defense. Article 9 of the Constitution does not deny Japan's right to self-defense. Therefore, the SDF is constitutional. That's Tokyo's official stance.
Sounds complicated.
Call it what you will. It's a distinctly Japanese way of interpreting things.
The U.S. has military forces stationed in Japan, right?
Right. Even though the Allied occupation ended, American forces are still stationed there under the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty.
Unlike Costa Rica.
Part of it stems from the occupation, but Japan also occupies a key strategic position from America's perspective. It's next door to the Soviet Union, and close to China and North Korea as well. It's integral to the security of Pacific Asia. For America, Japan represents a barrier against communism.
What about for Japan?
As you might expect, there's deep-rooted opposition to the alliance. In 1960 and 1970, when the treaty was up for revision, there were mass protest movements against it, especially in Okinawa. The U.S. only gave it back to Japan 2 years ago, and American bases are still concentrated there. It's a heavy burden for the Okinawans to bear.
Then why don't they scrap the treaty?
Lots of reasons. There's the imbalance of power with the U.S., of course, and if Japan pulled out, they'd be losing the nuclear umbrella America provides. And as for whether the JSDF could defend the country after the Americans left, I really couldn't say. Costa Rica is in a similar situation. They depend on the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, the so-called Rio Pact.
So, the countries with peace constitutions end up having to rely on other countries' armies. Kind of ironic.
On the flip side, not everybody in America is satisfied with it either. Some people argue Japan is freeloading off America's security guarantee. And you know how Japan's industrial exports are making inroads in the States.
Yeah, I've got a Japanese camera myself. Best damn camera around.
Japan's low defense spending allows it to invest more in economic recovery and expand its share of the American market. That's a bitter pill for Americans to swallow. You know that today, Japan is under the American nuclear umbrella.
Right.
The U.S. vowed to retaliate against any country that launches a nuclear strike against an allied country. That promise deters nuclear attacks against America's allies, hence the term nuclear umbrella. But suppose the Russians nuke Tokyo. Would America really nuke Moscow in return? If they did, the Soviet Union would undoubtedly retaliate. Would Washington really be willing to risk having a bomb dropped on itself in order to avenge Japan? I'm not so sure.
Don't tell me you're still worried about Japan. After all these years?
It's not that.
To be honest, I'm not convinced either. But Moscow faces the same dilemma. Maybe Washington wouldn't retaliate on Japan's behalf. Then again, maybe it would.
So you're saying Moscow wouldn't want to risk being attacked either?
The whole concept of nuclear deterrence is entirely hypothetical to begin with. When you get down to it, it's all smoke and mirrors.
Japan shall not possess, manufacture, or allow the introduction of nuclear weapons into Japan. Those are the 3 non-nuclear principles set forth by the Japanese government.
Allow the introduction? That's funny. Some of the U.S. warships that visit Japanese ports are armed with nukes. Or are you going to tell me they transfer them at sea onto other ships every time they visit?
You raise a good point, Snake. But the Japanese government doesn't recognize it as such. The introduction of nuclear weapons into Japanese territory would need to be agreed upon in advance. America hasn't made any such agreements. Therefore, they aren't bringing nukes into Japan. That's the official excuse.
Doesn't sound like much of an excuse to me.
I don't blame you. Keep in mind, though, Japan suffered actual nuclear attacks. Anti-nuke sentiment there runs deeper than you think. I suppose the government's not really in a position to admit that sort of thing.
So tell me, Kaz, how's the self-defense force you were in different from an army?
The JSDF is set up for national defense. It's not configured for aggression against other countries. It's what you'd call exclusive defense.
Exclusive defense?
It's the fundamental strategic posture of the JSDF. No preemptive attacks. Only the minimum defensive action necessary after an enemy attacks.
Anything defined as self-defense, then?
The JSDF originated as the National Police Reserve. Back then, American forces stationed in Japan were being sent over to fight in the Korean War. So in a sense, the NPR was filling a gap.
Police, huh? Reminds me of the Costa Rican Civil Guard.
Yeah, exactly. They're also dispatched to provide disaster relief. The year before I joined, they had a hell of a time trying to rescue some buses that got hit by landslides.
So why'd you quit the JSDF?
Because I didn't have a reason to be in Japan anymore.
A reason?
My mom had died 3 years earlier, so I didn't have to care for her anymore. With her gone, there was no point hanging around in Japan.
Yeah, but a man with your talents could have risen pretty high in the ranks, I imagine.
I don't know what they made of me. Could be it actually alienated me from the brass. And personally, I could never get used to the idea of exclusive defense.
Meaning?
On a strategic level, I can see how a country could go with the exclusive defense model used by the JSDF, and I've got nothing against my fellow soldiers who believe in it. On a tactical level, though, it just rubbed me the wrong way. To put it simply, I was itching for a real fight.
I figured.
And I felt as long as I was in the JSDF, I'd never be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with my father, who was in the U.S. Army. Seeing Yukio Mishima's suicide didn't help either.
Yukio Mishima, the guy who wrote The Temple of the Golden Pavilion.
The way he questioned the status quo hit home with me. Not that I admired his vision or anything, but it did get me thinking, that's for sure. Life's funny sometimes, isn't it?
What brought that on?
We first met as enemies on the battlefield. And now here we are fighting side by side.
You mean Colombia?
Yeah, after I quit the JSDF. I made my way there and got myself a position as a drill sergeant for a band of revolutionaries, despite the fact that I'd never seen a day of combat.
I see you had the gift for talking business in Spanish even back then.
Oh, come on, stop it. You're making me blush. Unlucky for me, though, you were in the service of the Colombian army. I remember it like it was yesterday. It all happened in an instant. You guys ambushed us, and half my unit was taken out. My mind went totally blank. I couldn't keep it together. My whole unit was wiped out, and I was left half dead from a bomb blast.
Then, as I was leaving, you yelled out at me. I came all the way from Japan to be here. My place is on the battlefield. Then you asked for my help, saying, I want to be the one to end it. I remember being surprised that there were still samurai in Japan.
You guys came over to me. I had a grenade hidden under me, but even then you were too fast. The second I pulled the pin, you grabbed the hand I was using to hold the grenade with both palms.
I didn't want it to go off. I'd heard samurai were a proud bunch. I wanted to know why one of them would stoop so low as to try to take his opponent with him.
And I said, I'll never lose again. We'll never lose again.
Yeah. We'll do whatever it takes, but we'll never be beaten again.
Then, I passed out from the blood loss. When I woke up, I was in your camp's infirmary, stuck full of tubes. Why'd you save me? Your enemy after I tried to kill you.
Because you swallowed your pride and fought with everything you had.
I just didn't want to lose.
You found a way to fight back, even in the face of death, even when you knew you were going to die. That's the mark of a true warrior. It's not about gain and loss, or victory and defeat. I looked at the way you lived your life and saw the path I needed to take as a warrior.
Wow, I never knew that. And that's why you...
I realized then that the battlefield doesn't only divide people into allies and enemies. Sometimes it tells you more than just who's an ally or who's an enemy. Sometimes it helps reveal your true comrades.
Like you and me, huh?
That's right. And 2 years later, here we are.
Can I ask you a favor, Snake?
If you ask nicely.
To make MSF bigger, we need to do some recruiting.
Yeah. What's your point?
I want you to avoid killing enemy soldiers as much as possible and send them back using Fulton recovery. Not much we can do with a corpse except give it a funeral.
Obviously.
Put him to sleep, knock him out, hold him up even. And if you do have to fight, try to leave them near death instead of dead.
And then use the Fulton recovery system. Sounds easy enough.
You know what'd be really nice, though? If we had a way to Fulton recover anybody at any time. Don't carry any more gear than you need. If you try and stuff your entire arsenal into your backpack, it'll be too heavy and your mobility will be impaired. You'll only be hurting yourself.
I know. Take only what you need. Every rookie knows that.
You can check the weight of your gear before heading out, so make sure you do.
Got it.
Even a born warrior like you gets hand tremors, Snake. It happens even when you're full of stamina, and it only gets worse when you're tired, especially with larger, heavier weapons. Obviously, you'll get better aim crouching than you will standing, and when you use a scope, setting your sights on a single point will gradually give you a more precise aim. As we develop better weapons at Mother Base, though, you may gain access to new, low-tremor versions of the same guns. So if you expect the shakes to be a problem, you might want to put some resources into R&D.
I'll keep it in mind. Then again, the more you use a weapon, the more your hands get used to it. Sometimes it pays to be faithful to your gun.
Choosing the right uniform is crucial. Pick one that matches the mission objective and your own combat style. Jungle fatigues are made for jungle combat. They provide decent protection and let you carry a fair number of weapons. Your standard uniform, basically. The distinguishing factor is that your camo index will vary a lot, depending on the area. Wear a pattern that makes you blend in with your surroundings, and your camo index goes up. Wear something that clashes, and you'll stick out like a sore thumb.
Pick the right pattern for the occasion. Sigint used to lecture me on it all the time.
Naked. That's exactly what you are with this uniform. The pants are the same as the jungle fatigues. Obviously, since you're exposing your bare skin, your defense and camo index are gonna be low. On the plus side, it's so light you can move around quicker.
Good for showing off muscles, too.
Hey, Snake, I heard they gave you your old code name because you used to run around with your shirt off. Is that true?
Don't believe everything you hear. They called me naked because I went in without gear or food. I had to procure everything on site.
You mean they sent you into the jungle without even a pair of pants? On a halo jump from 35,000 feet? Sweet Jesus, you are a legend.
You're busting my balls, aren't you, Kaz?
Little bit, yeah.